Welcome back, everyone, to another Downward Day. And earlier this week, I found out something that was kind of mind-blowing. It was one of these things that seemed like it should have been pretty big news, but for whatever reason, up until this point, I hadn't heard anyone talk about it. And chances are I probably wouldn't have even been made aware of this issue if it wasn't for something that happened out of complete chance. So over the past few months, my parents took a trip to China. And so I was talking about their trip with them after they came back. And my dad was telling me about a movie they saw while they were there. It's this 3D animated film called Ninja 2. And from how he described it, it seemed to be a pretty big hit in China. And so I'm thinking to myself, well, that sounds like an interesting little regional hit for the Chinese movie-going audience. Let me look up this film and see just how much it made at the box office. And well, so far, this little obscure film has made $2.1 billion. And yes, those are US dollars. As of the day I'm recording this, it's currently the 5th highest grossing film in history, and it's still rising. Needless to say, this was completely news to me, because normally in the entertainment industry, it's a pretty big deal whenever any project breaks into the top 20 of the highest grossing films of all time. Yet for some reason, this random Chinese film that has come out of nowhere to break into the top 5. I haven't heard a peep about it from the American media. And if most of you watching this are like me, this is probably the first time any of you are hearing about it as well. I found it pretty astounding that what should be this pretty monumental story has seemingly slid completely under the radar. And I think there's a compelling reason why the US and Western entertainment media has been so hush-hush about this topic. Because the idea that some foreign dark horse film can come out of nowhere and put itself in the top 5 of all-time box office earnings, you have to believe that it sends a pretty frightening message for the state of the American film industry. And if there's one company that's gotta be concerned about this development, you have to imagine it's Disney, which is due to how Disney's underlying business model for the past 15 years or so has predominantly involved courting the Chinese market specifically. Disney is the one major American film studio, perhaps more than any other, that has tried to get their foot in the door on the Chinese market. And suffice to say, that business decision has resulted in a pretty significant trade-off in terms of the overall quality of Disney's films over the past decade plus. I'm sure that by now I don't even have to explain this to most of you, because it's pretty easy to see for yourself how Disney's recent repertoire of films has been quite lackluster.
Hoo-wee! Whoa! Oh! I never walk out of a movie, but yeah!
Now, of course, there's a variety of reasons for why that's the case, but a pretty significant factor for Disney's overall fall-off in quality has to be that these products are being designed from the ground up to appeal to the Chinese market. Or at the very least, try as hard as they can to not offend or alienate the Chinese market. And with that intention comes a variety of things which are suddenly off limits. If you want your movie to make money in China, there's a whole list of things that you can't show on screen. And at the end of the day, these rules just end up restricting creativity. Your bag of tricks to tell the story as an artist is now greatly diminished. And what this ultimately ends up doing is capping the potential of your creative work. As an artist, you can only take so much of getting told you can't do this and you can't do that before it's no longer possible to actually make something great. In such a restricted environment, the most talented artists can definitely make something decent. They can even make something good. But when it comes to making something that actually excels far and beyond, it's pretty much impossible to do so when so much of your toolkit is off limits. And this is a trade-off that Disney certainly must have anticipated, but ultimately decided that it was worth the risk. And the result of this has been that pretty much for the past 15 years, Disney has sacrificed the quality of their work to chase after Chinese dollars. For a good amount of time at least, it appeared to be working. Disney started raking in a lot more money from overseas. But lately, in the past couple years or so, it seems that something about that equation has flipped, where all of a sudden the risks are starting to become much more visible than the reward. As things are today, it appears that the decade plus of predominantly mediocre products that Disney has been flooding the market with has burned through the good graces of a lot of their pre-existing audience in the Western world. And right now, the patience of the customer is really being tested. Over the past 3 years, there's been a disturbing number of Disney releases that have outright bombed at the US box office. You know, you can only flood the market with mediocre junk for so long before it starts to damage the prestige of your brand. And as each year goes by with more and more Disney flops, the more and more people are going to start to see the name Disney as a low-quality brand. Thus far, Disney has been weathering the storm through the sheer quantity of films they're putting out on the market. As the trend has gone for the past few years, for every few misses the company suffers, they do manage to get a pretty big hit. And so for all the money lost with their increasing number of failures, they've been making up for it with big box office winners like Deadpool and Wolverine, Inside Out 2, and Moana 2. Which, by the way, isn't it somewhat disturbing that something as poorly put together as Moana 2 made $1 billion? The future of artistic standards in cinema are not looking good. But anyway, that's how Disney's been staying afloat despite their seemingly record number of box office bombs. But eventually, as the number of failures and wasted projects continues to increase, they're going to pass a threshold where not even their big winners can bail them out. The ship can only take on so much water before it starts to sink. And I think in just a few years or so, the top brass at Disney are going to have to start asking themselves some difficult questions. Thus far, for this whole time that Disney's quality control has taken a nosedive, they've been able to sit back and justify to themselves, oh, well, it's all worth it because we cornered the Chinese market. It's been a justifiable business decision to water down our product for our domestic audience in order to make our product more palatable for international viewers. And then Ne Zha 2 comes out and starts breaking box office records. And all of a sudden, that whole justification is no longer a certainty. Because what exactly happens to this whole gambit when Chinese viewers decide that they prefer their own films over Disney's? What's going to happen when the Chinese film industry discovers that it's more profitable to produce their own films domestically than importing films from Disney? All of a sudden, that whole international market that you've been lusting over so much this whole time is no longer the guaranteed stream of money that it once was. And you might be starting to see this situation where Disney did all this damage to their brand back at home to really wind up with nothing to show for it. And who knows, maybe this is just an overreaction and China's new booming emerging film industry can still manage to coexist with various imports from Hollywood. But if you look at how China tends to operate in other sectors of the economy, once any Chinese industry starts to figure out how to do anything cheaper and more efficient than an international rival, they tend to start shifting everything to be made in-house. And I'm curious if we're on the cusp of that in terms of the film industry. You know, 15 years ago, China didn't have the resources to produce this polished Hollywood-style product, and that's potentially a point where importing films from Disney would have really helped them stand out. But now, it's a different story. Just looking at clips from Ne Zha, the animation quality is pretty much on par with anything coming out of Hollywood. There no longer appears to be this sizable gap in resources and expertise between these two industries, and assuming that China and the US are now at equal strength in terms of technical ability, you gotta imagine that China now has the advantage of servicing their own market. And you can clearly see that with this new film that extensively taps into old-fashioned Chinese mythology, something that would be pretty challenging for any foreign-born producer to authentically recreate. And the result of this is a product that's far more popular with Chinese audiences than anything that's ever come out of Disney or Hollywood. And I should clarify here that this $2 billion box office figure was done almost entirely off of domestic returns from within China. This movie managed to accomplish this with barely any international release. In fact, I'm not even sure where you're supposed to watch it in the United States. And that's why I've been unable to discuss anything relating to the actual quality of the movie because I have no idea personally. As for that, all I can do is defer to review scores, which are pretty high for this film. So we've now entered this bizarre state of the world where China is making films that are both highly profitable and critically acclaimed. An attribute that used to belong to Disney for most of the 20th century. And to add insult to injury, Ne Zha 2 has managed to rip away the coveted, highest-grossing animated film title that has long since been held by Disney. With all that taken into account, you certainly have to view this as a bad omen if you're a producer at Disney. Because not only does it risk tanking your international revenue streams, what exactly is stopping the Chinese film industry from starting to export their products to the United States? If they can figure out how to start pumping out serviceable films at a cheaper price than us, what's stopping them from filling our theaters with their products? Just as they figured out how to do with consumer goods and e-commerce. Are we going to have to put a ban on Chinese movies just like we do with Chinese electric cars? If things keep up at this rate, this is probably going to become a legitimate concern 5 to 10 years from now. I mean, just look at the success of other Asian entertainment exports like K-pop and anime, and even TikTok if you want to include it in that category. America no longer has this sense of domestic brand loyalty when it comes to entertainment, especially among young people. So there's really not much standing in the way of a hypothetical Chinese takeover of the US film market, which would surely be an ironic role reversal based on how things have gone for the past decade or so. With all this being said, there's potentially a big shift in the balance of power in the entertainment industry coming soon. And if things keep going on their current trajectory, companies like Disney have set themselves up to suffer the most disastrous consequences. And it's worth noting that historically Disney has gone through some rough patches before, and thus far they've always managed to rebound. But I don't know. As we find ourselves facing once again another lackluster period of Disney history, things just seem different this time around. I think Disney has really heavily mortgaged the farm this time, and the upcoming harvest is not looking so good. So if you're someone like me who's sick of paying to watch this new batch of Disney disappointment, it turns out that soon enough, they might be the ones who end up paying the price.